G'day poker people, welcome back. Where we last left off, I was being kicked out of the United States for my expired tourist visa. Fortunately though, I didn't come back to Melbourne alone. Brennan took the over 24-hour trip with me to get back to Melbourne, where I introduced her to mum and we just spent two of the most fun weeks of my life together. I sort of acted as her personal tour guide, walking her around Melbourne, and it was some of the most fun I've ever had. Of course, naturally, I didn't have much time to gamble, but after the 2 weeks was up, she had to return home to her job and dog. My schedule cleared up a bit and I did have some time to mix in some poker games whilst I was waiting for my passport to be renewed. I didn't really expect it to take that long, but I don't know, there was a big backup after COVID or something, but it almost took me 3 months to get the passport renewed before I could book that return ticket to see Brennan again. That just means we've got 3 months worth of poker hands to get into. Like I mentioned, before I went to the United States, I'd been grinding the 136 home game scene around Melbourne, and the plan was to just hop right back into it and grind these games as much as I could before I returned to the United States. So that's what this video is going to be about. It's about the 3-month period of me grinding 136 games across the Melbourne home game scene. So let's not waste any more time and get into the action. Let's go. First hand up, we got some 136 action. A tight aggressive cutoff opens at 220, and then I'm in the $6 straddle with 6-6. I'm feeling some 666 energy, so I throw in the call, and then we are heads up to a flop of 6-3 deuce. I told you I was feeling that 666 energy, but still going to check it over in flow to the pre-flop aggressor, who does go ahead and bet 15. The action's back on me here, and I think this is a great check raise spot with a hand as strong as top set. The board is really good for our range, so there's a lot of incentive to check raise, so I definitely should be doing it with some of my strong hands, such as top set. In game, I flattered. I was worried about the opponent overfolding, but I think that's definitely an overthinking it. I should just try to get value when I have such a nutted hand. Whatever the case, I make the mistake and just flat, and then we still heads up to a turn, which is the 8 of diamonds, putting out backdoor diamonds. I still check it over in flow to the pre-flop aggressor, who goes ahead and bets 80. Now, this is a really interesting size for the opponent to use, in my opinion. It is very strong for them to use an overbet here when they're going to know I have a lot of strong hands in my range. So I do give them credit for definitely all the overpairs, as well as some 2-pair and set combinations. So there's definitely a lot we can get value from with a check raise. Having said that though, when the opponent does use this large sizing, there's got to be a lot of incentive for us to use a lot of traps in this spot, just because the majority of my range on this turn is going to be 1-pair hands. Like when I have a hand like pocket sevens or a 6, something like that, this is kind of more middling strength. Them using large bets is going to put us in a really tough spot, and in theory we're meant to defend some of them across all 3 streets, but we don't necessarily have to do that if we do incorporate traps in our range. That's basically me taking a really long and nerdy way to say I think we do have to mix in some traps here, and I think it might be a good spot to do it with 6-6 in this instance. Definitely possible I'm still overthinking things and getting too much into poker theory at a 136 game. Whatever the case, I did decide to flat in this instance. Really curious to hear your opinion on this hand, particularly this street, in the comments below, so let me know. But back to the game. We are heads up to the river, which is the king of hearts. I check it over to the opponent again, who goes ahead and bets 75. At this point, I think we just have to raise for value, particularly when my opponent does use such a small sizing. They can have all of the pairs that are pocket 9s through pocket aces, a worse set, 2-pair. So I do mix in the check raise. I go ahead and make it 220, and then the opponent thinks for maybe like 10 seconds before moving all in. Wow, I was not expecting that, and honestly at this point I'm pretty worried that I'm behind. I've got to be honest with you. I lose to 5-4 pocket kings and pocket 8s. I do beat some of the sets that are worse than mine, but I've got to be honest with you. I'm not really convinced that a worse set is going to go all in for value when they've got to be worried that I'm slow playing a set or a straight. So I kind of take that option off of the table right away. So the only thing that I really beat would be a bluff, and backdoor diamonds missed. Something like ace-5 of diamonds, ace-4 of diamonds will be great bluff candidates for the opponent to use, knowing that it's less likely over straight. But that's 2 hands, and unless they're going really crazy with like ace-10 of diamonds, ace-jack of diamonds, which definitely is somewhat possible, I think I'd just have to give them credit for having a stronger hand here. I know you guys hate when I do really nitty folds on the river, but we're facing a river 3-bet all in, and I just am not convinced that the 4th nuts here is good. So I end up folding my hand. Let me know what you think in the comments below. But before we move on, the opponent was kind enough to show us at least one card. They flashed the 5 of diamonds before mucking both cards. Honestly, my gut reaction to this is I actually feel like I probably did make a good fold, just because if the opponent's sort of showing one card, there's a diamond too, that kind of implies that it was a bluff. Like, they're probably doing that because they have the nuts, but we'll never know for sure. Before we get into the next hand, I just wanted to take this opportunity to invite all of you to join the Anti-Gambling Gambling Club. Head over to leebets.com. We have a bunch of different anti-gambling gambling club t-shirts, hats, and hoodies in all different types of sizes and colors. So head over to leebets.com and join the club. But for now, let's get back into the gambling. Next hand up, we have the 136 $12 straddle on. And I know, because I put that straddle on myself, and we have a loose aggressive cutoff opening at 225. Then I'm in the second straddle with 5-4 offsuit. Definitely a loose hand to be defending here, but we are in a private game and we definitely don't want to be kicked out of the private game for playing too tight. So I think in that type of dynamic, when you do want to give action, taking these like looser defends in the straddle or big blind is probably a good spot to just like give more action back to the game. So I threw in the call here, and then we are heads up to a flop of Queen 6-4 with 2 clubs. Check it over to the villain. They go ahead and c-bet 20. Now the action's on me here, and I actually like our hand on this board. We have a pair, we have a backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw, so I definitely don't want to fold with that considered, particularly when we are so deep with the villain. But between calling and raising, I think I like check raising a little bit better here. It's just going to deny equity to a lot of the opponent's overcard hands, which have great equity against us. But even if we do get called, we have a bunch of great turns that we can double barrel on, and it balances out our range a bit when we do check raise with nutted hands like 2 pairs and sets. So I go ahead and make it 100. Then the villain throws in the call, which isn't quite what I wanted to see, but fortunately still plenty of playability with this hand, particularly when the turn is the 3 of diamonds, giving us the open-ended straight draw. Great turn, improves the equity of our hand, and is going to put a lot more pressure on my opponent's 1 pair combinations if I do continue to bluff. So that's what I do. I go ahead and bet 150, and then the villain thinks about it for maybe like 5 seconds before throwing in the call. So we are heads up to the river, which is the 4 of diamonds. Let's go. We make trips. We are no longer bluffing. We are hoping to get called. Really hope the opponent has a queen or stronger. And I think if they do, they're probably going to pay off a big bet. So I put in a juicy bet of 500, and then literally as I put the 5 black chips out of there, the opponent snap calls. Like, they probably beat me in the pot with their chips. I show my hand straight away, and then the opponent's like, God damn it, and they turn over pocket aces. So wow, we delivered an absolute bad beat, and very happy I played my absolute trash hand and cracks the pre-flop nuts. Let's go. The next hand up, we're back to the 136, and then a parlay open limps in the cutoff, and I'm on the button with Jack 9 of hearts. I raise it up to 25, and then a very loose aggressive opponent in the small blind 3 bets me for probably the 10th time in this session. They go ahead and make it 125. The limper folds. The action's back on me here, and it's always going to be a consideration to 4-bet pre-flop when you're being 3-bet by a very aggressive opponent. But I think in this instance, when we are closing the action and we do have the button, it might be a good spot to just like play a potting position and see what happens across 3 different streets. So that's what I do in this instance. I throw in the call, and we're heads up to a flop of King Jack 5 Rainbow. The opponent goes ahead and c-bets, not surprisingly. They make it 100, and I think we have nothing to do but just call here with my middle pair. I think the opponent might be c-betting near 100% of their range, and we're either way ahead of their hand or way behind, so no use raising or folding, in my opinion. I throw in the call. We see a turn, which is the 3 of spades, putting out backdoor spades, and then the villain checks. And honestly, in the moment, I was kind of surprised that they checked. I just know this opponent loves to barrel off, so when they do check, it makes me a bit suspicious that maybe they have a middling strength showdown value hand, pocket queens, a strong jack, pocket 10s, pocket 9s. And we do beat some of those hands, but I still think it'd be way too thin to bet for value. Plus, if we do bet here and they fold some absolute junk, like maybe they would have bluffed with that hand on the river. So yeah, nothing to do here but just check and take the free river, which is the 6 of diamonds, and seems like a pretty inconsequential card to me until the villain goes all in for 1,075. And I'm just thinking, what? I did not expect this at all. Essentially, the opponent's representing that they rivered a straight or a set, or that they slow played something on an earlier street, all of which are possible, particularly the rivered straight. Even a turned set wouldn't surprise me either. It just wouldn't be the craziest thing if they did have one of those hands. So I am somewhat concerned I'm behind here. Like, if he had have bet 500, I probably would have just called. But the fact he went 1,000 really makes me sus that he has a strong hand. Yeah, it's definitely a difficult spot. This probably is one of the stronger hands I can have here when I check the turn, but I'm getting an awful price to call, and I am concerned that the opponent does have a nutted hand. I will say, I don't think they're betting this large with like king queen, or even pocket aces might not go this large. I really think it's something that's 2 pair or better, which is a narrow range, but I give them credit for it. I do fold my hand, and then the opponent absolutely gleefully sits up and shows the queen 10 offsuit. So pretty bad read there. Honestly, a great play from villain. I think the all-in is probably the only size bet I would have folded to on the river. So credit where credit's due. You got me, mate. Next hand up, we're still in the 1-3-6 streets, and I'm in the hijack with ace queen offsuit. I go ahead and make it 20, and I get 2 cold callers before a loose aggressive straddle 3-bets it to 90. Action's back on me here. Could go either way between 4-betting and calling. In this instance, I decided to call though, and then one of the cold callers folds, but a passive big blind does call. So we're 3 ways to a flop of queen 9-4 with 2 spades. The big blind checks it over to the straddle, who c-bets for 100. The action's on me here, and I think having position in this hand against a loose aggressive opponent, I think there's nothing to do but just call here. I would feel different if the opponent was like sticky, or if I was out of position, but I think this is a perfect cocktail where we just want to call in position with a lot of our strong hands. So that's what I do, and then the big blind folds. So we do go heads up to the turn. The 7 of clubs. This card does not slow the opponent down. They go ahead and bet 275. Now I am getting a little bit uncomfortable despite the strength of my hand. My opponent can definitely have aces or kings. Set is a little bit less likely, but our hand is just too strong to be folding at this point. Definitely give my opponent credit for at least some bluffs as a loose aggressive opponent, so can't be going anywhere just yet. I throw in the call, and we are heads up to a river, which is the 4 of clubs. And then the opponent does it. They rip it all in, 630. The action's on me here, and now I'm really concerned that I'm behind to a better overpair. I figure most of the hands I lose to, but a set, not totally out of the question either. I'm not really worried about ace 4. I don't think that the opponent would have bet large with that hand on the turn, so I take that out of the consideration pretty quickly. It's more just the bigger overpairs, and that is actually a pretty narrow range, and if I do give my opponent credit for some triple barrels, I mean Jack 10 missed, front door spades missed, 10-8 missed. There are a bunch of missed draws here, so if I'm going to give my opponent credit as a loose aggressive opponent, I really just don't think I can be folding ace queen on this run out. So I throw in the call, and then the opponent says good call before showing king jack of diamonds. So yes, let's go. We pick off the bluff. Yeah, we're not in Tampa anymore because people love bluffing here, as you can tell. Next hand up, under the gun, raises it to 20. They get 3 different cold callers before the action's on my button with ace jack offsuit. I decide to 3-bet it up to 120, definitely on the looser side of 3-bets. Probably wouldn't recommend this as a standard play, but folding's boring, as is calling. I take the aggressive line, make it 120, and then at least it partially works because everyone folds except for a passive cutoff who does throw in the call. So it heads up to a flop of king queen 6 with 2 spades. The opponent checks it over to me with the ace of spades. I think this is a great combination to use as a c-bet bluff here. Going to be a lot of good turns for us to continue barreling on, and I think my opponent's going to have a lot of pocket pairs below the queens in my range, so it might just be a good spot to c-bet bluff in general. I go ahead and make it 100, and then the villain throws in the call. So it heads up to the turn, which is the jack of spades, giving us a pair and the nut flush draw. But things get interesting when the villain decides to lead out for 200, and I'm very concerned that I'm behind here. I think my opponent is going to have a bunch of 2-pair combinations on this board, essentially all of the Broadway 2-pair combinations, probably offsuit. Plus they're going to have a bunch of flushes in their range, straights, ace 10 and 10-9, also very likely in my opinion. Having said that though, I don't know if we should be folding just yet. We do have the nut flush draw, as well as a great card to potentially bluff with in the river if we find a good spot for it. Definitely don't want to be folding here. Could potentially see bluff raising, but yeah, like I said, I think my opponent has a strong range, so I don't know that it would necessarily work right here, right now. So I do just decide to throw in the call. Let me know what you think in the comments below. But we are heads up to the river, which is the 4 of diamonds. Doesn't slow the opponent down. They go ahead and bet 400. So the action's on me here, and like I said, on the turn, I'm pretty thoroughly convinced I'm behind. I think my opponent has a lot of 2-pair through flush combinations, but we know they don't have the nut flush, so definitely very tempted to potentially go all in as a bluff here. Gonna be pretty embarrassing if they just snap call off with like a 10 high flush, or a straight flush, I suppose, is also possible. I just think back to all the times on the river when I've had the nut flush and I rip it all in and I just get folds because it's like pretty easy to put someone on the nut flush. I think it might be the case here. I think I rip it in. I can very credibly represent that hand, so I decide to go for it. I rip it all in for 1,380. Then the opponent is in the tank for a good 2 minutes. Then they start like muttering under their breath. I can't really make out anything that they're saying except for a bunch of swear words. Yeah, definitely a big sweat for the 2 minutes while they're tanking. Honestly, I went back and forth between, oh, they're definitely going to call, or they're definitely going to fold. Like, they're just wasting time before, after about 2 minutes, they throw their hand in the mark. Didn't show us what they had, but we don't really care. It definitely could beat a pair of jacks, and we're raking in this pot with a big river bluff. Let's go. This next hand came probably about 20 hours into a absolute marathon session at the private game, and as you can see, the stacks were very deep in this hand, and we do have the $12 straddle on as well, by the way, making it a little bit of a shallower game, but not really with stacks this deep. Anyway, I'm in the cutoff with pocket queens, baby. I go ahead and raise it up to 30, and then a loose aggressive player in the second straddle calls. So we are heads up to a flop of 7-7 deuce with 2 hearts. The opponent checks it over to me, and definitely want to get a bit of value when I have a hand as strong as queens, particularly when we're this deep. I go ahead and make it 30, then the opponent check raises to 200. Now, I definitely am a little bit concerned that the opponent could have a 7x combination. I definitely think they're going to check raise it on this board when we are so deep, but they could also be check raising worse hands for value. If they have a pocket pair that's 8s plus, they probably don't want a cheap turn to peel off, and I'm going to have a lot of overcards in my range, plus flush draw possible as a semi bluff, plus just some random nonsense. I definitely do give this opponent credit for a lot of bluffs here. So can't go anywhere. I throw in the call, and then we do get to see a turn, which is the 9 of clubs. Does not slow the opponent down. They go ahead and bet 500, and now alarm bells are starting to go off a little bit. Definitely think the opponent is gonna use this line if they do have some 7. However, having said that, I think if they do have a hand like 9x of hearts, 10-8 of hearts, 8-6 of hearts, queen jack of hearts, even like jack 10 of hearts, something that did turn a lot of equity on this turn, I definitely think they could potentially be using this bluff size as well. Even though there is a lot of concern I lose at this point, I really don't think I can be folding to a loose aggressive opponent just yet, particularly when I don't have the queen of hearts myself. So I do throw in the call with the mindset of I'm going to figure out what I want to do on the river. In the river, 3 of diamonds. This does not slow the opponent down. They go ahead and bet 2,000, which definitely was the biggest bet I'd faced in at least this night of the game. Puts me in a pretty gross spot. Like I said, I do give a loose aggressive opponent having at least some bluffs, and pretty much everything missed on this river. The front door hearts, back door potential straight draws. So if I do give them credit for those bluffs, I don't think I can be folding, although I'm very concerned that the opponent could just have a 7x suited combination, could have just called pre-flop with 7 deuce just for a laugh and ended up flopping the nuts. Ace-7, king-7, 8-7 offsuit would make all the world of sense. So I really do lose to a lot, but I just can't get it out of my head. Front door flush missed, backdoor straight draw missed, and this guy has definitely been known to show a bluff or 2 in our time in the game. So I decide after probably a good 2 minutes of tanking, which partially is because this is a gross spot, also partially because I don't think my brain was functioning at 100% after 20 hours of play, I do decide to put in 2 black plaques, and the blacks were 1,000 each. Put them in the middle for the call, and then the opponent shows king-7 suited. So there you go. They did make absolute maximum value by fast playing their trips. And GG to the villain. You got me on this hand, mate. Next hand, we're still in the 1, 3, 6, 12 streets, and I'm under the gun with ace-6 of hearts. I go ahead and raise it up to 30, and then I get no less than 3 different callers. So we go 4 ways to a flop of 10, 10, 4 with 2 hearts. So, hey, we make the nut flush draw. That's always fun. But still, when the second straddle checks it over to me, I think it's a good spot to check. You know, guys know if you've been watching these videos, I like checking, multi-way, out of position, even with a hand of strongest nut flush draw. So that's what I do in this instance. +1 player checks, and then a loose aggressive button goes ahead and bets 150. The straddle folds, and the action's on me here, and I think it's a good spot to just call. We do have a bit of showdown value with our ace high, and even if we are behind, I've got to be worried that the button could potentially have a 10x combination, which obviously isn't going to fold to a check raise. So I throw in the call, and then things get really interesting because a +1 player raises it up to 450. The button folds pretty quickly. The action's back on me, and I'll say straight up, I'm very concerned that I'm behind here. I think the +1 player is going to have a bunch of 10x combinations in their range. Essentially all of the Broadway offsuit 10x combinations. But even if that is the case, we're getting a pretty good price to draw towards our nut flush. I think it's very unlikely we're drawing dead. The opponent probably doesn't play 10-4 offsuit or suited pre-flop at all. And if they did have quads or pocket fours, I don't think they'd be raising here. People like calling with those hands to keep flush draws in. So I think getting this price really can't be going anywhere with a hand as strong as nut flush draw, plus not totally out of the realm of possibility that they are semi-bluffing with the worst flush draw. So I throw in the call, and we are heads up to a turn, which is an interesting one. It's the ace of clubs, so we do improve to top pair, but definitely still going to check it over to the opponent in flow, which I do, and then they go ahead and bet 1,000. Really not liking this spot, I gotta be honest with you, and I just want to say straight off the bat that I take calling completely off of the table as an option here. We've got about 1,500 in our stack, so we're either going all in or folding. So calling's off of the table, and then it just becomes, how thoroughly convinced am I that the opponent does have a 10x combination? I think it's very likely, particularly if they're going to have all of the offsuit like Jack 10, Queen 10 and King 10, maybe even Ace 10 also. We're drawing very thin to a chop if they have that hand. But having said that, it's very unlikely since we do have the ace blocker ourselves. And the one thing that I do have in the back of my head that maybe they're semi-bluffing with a combo draw. I mean, King Queen of Hearts, King Jack of Hearts, Queen Jack of Hearts, 2 3 of Hearts would be a loose VP at pre-flop. Wouldn't be the craziest thing I've ever seen at a poker table. So there are a bunch of combo draws, and with that in mind, it's somewhat possible that we're ahead with our ace X. Yeah. In all honesty though, I wouldn't fault anyone for folding here. It does seem like the opponent's taking a pretty face-up line with their 10x combination. Let me know what you would do in the comments below. I think in this private game, particularly after playing for, we definitely weren't 20 hours into the game at this point, but probably a good like 10 or 12 hours in at this point. I don't know if I quite had the discipline to fold the nut flush draw with the top pair. So I did rip it all in for 1,520, and then the opponent snap calls, which is bad news because we know what that means. I show my ace-6, and then they show the King 10 offsuit. So there you go. They have us in absolutely awful shape. We do have a few outs though to improve. So we're off to the river. We've got some outs to bad beat them in this over $4,000 pot. And the dealer peels the river, and it's the ace of diamonds. Let's go. We make the full house on the river. Absolutely give the bad beat of the game to the villain there with their trips. And, you know, obviously always not going to complain when I rake in a $4,000 pot, but looking at this thing objectively without taking any emotion into it, it probably is a bit of a mistake to call off here. As nitty as it seems, I think the opponent's pretty much always going to have a 10x combination in this spot. Let me know if you disagree though. So there you go. They were the most interesting hands I played in my 3 months of grinding the 136 games when I got back to Melbourne. But finally, after a very long wait, my passport was finally renewed, and I got it, and I could book my plane ticket back over to the United States to see Brennan again, which was very exciting considering they say that absence makes the heart grow fonder, and that was definitely the case in this instance. Fortunately, I did get some fun poker games in the meantime. Now, when I went back over to the United States, I really didn't want to be locked into only being there for 90 days at a time before the tourist visa ran out. So I actually began looking for work, which I hoped would give me a working visa that would allow me to stay a lot longer. And to make a long story short, I did end up getting a job as a video editor in the United States through a US employer. It definitely gave me the option to stay there for at least 6 months at a time, which was great because it just gave me a bunch of opportunities to get to build this relationship with Brennan, perhaps, and see where things go. And the thing with being a video editor, particularly as a job, is actually a lot of flexibility in terms of when you can work. As long as you meet a deadline, you can definitely take some nights off and do some other fun stuff like, I don't know, potentially playing poker each night. So that was the goal. Go back over to the United States, spend some time with Brennan, work the video editing job, and grind some poker as well. So that's what the next video is going to be about when I did go back over to the United States and grinded some poker. So if you want to see what happens, you better hit the subscribe button to get the next video when it comes out. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.